common problems with El Toro. So I kind of hear a range of tempi with El Toro. Some orchestras play way too fast. Some orchestras play way too slow. The orchestras that play way too fast, either they drank too much coffee that morning, or they're excited, or they got those contest jitters, or they're rushing. And a lot of them are rushing. And in this video, I'm going to go over some strategies on maybe how not to rush. The students that are playing it too slow, I wonder why they're playing it too slow. Do they not have the technique to play it faster? And if so, maybe they should have waited until they had that technique, because El Toro is just not as much fun unless you can play it at tempo. So why is the rushing so common? Well, young orchestras like to rush anyway. All right, let's face it. But in measure 57, we have an accelerando. The tempo slows down, and then we get faster. In Texas, we call it an accelerando, because in Texas, the emphasis is always on the first syllable of every word. We say things like address and equator instead of address and equator. So if you move to Texas, make sure to talk like us, or else you get beaten up on the playground, as I did when I was a child. Anyway, when we phrase El Toro, we don't want to emphasize the first beat of every measure. So go back and watch my video on style to learn how to stylize this piece and create 4-bar phrases. Don't play music the way you talk. So at 57, we slow down and we have an accelerando. When you rehearse this the very first time, slow it down and don't speed up. Make them play through this whole thing slowly, because they're going to be like horses headed back towards the barn, all right? They're just going to want to take off. So what I do is start slowly, play the whole thing slow, and then once they get used to doing that, I'll slow the whole thing down, play everything slow, and then I'll start speeding up in 64. Okay? And then once we get good at that, okay, well, we'll slow the whole thing down, and then we'll start speeding up at 63. Okay? But what a lot of orchestras do is they slow down, and then they start taking off, and then they go back to the capo, they go back to the top, and all of a sudden, we're 30 clicks faster than we were when we originally started this piece. So that's one way to help solve the rushing, is to make sure that 57 doesn't go too fast and that we control the accelerando. We don't just take off like a horse headed back towards the barn. Another place that we tend to rush on are the double down bows. If students don't have the right technique for the double down bows, they will rush. Okay, anytime we have space in between notes, beginners especially, younger players especially, they don't like space. They don't like rest. They don't like silence. This is a generation where they have a screen in front of them all the time, and it's just dopamine's firing in their brain at all times. And when there's silence, they have no idea what to do. So they're going to fill that silence. And so that's why they tend to rush whenever there's a rest, whenever there's a double down bow, whenever there's no sound occurring. They're going to create sound here because it's so uncomfortable for them. So how do we get them to do that? We have them set the bow and grip the string. So I have an episode on bowings. If you haven't watched that one already, you can go back on that one, and I covered that. But if you have rushing problems, especially with the double down bows, or maybe if you're using brush strokes here on the quarter notes, it's almost always because they're not setting the bow and gripping the string. So go back and watch that and have your students use the right technique. The other problem that I hear in El Toro is when the violins get up here on the E string, and there's material for the first violins and second violins on the E string. Sometimes the tone gets really bright and really strident, like on the sustained F sharp here, the sustained G. It can get really gross. Now, when we're teaching these long bows, we're teaching our students how to use heavier bows. We don't need to use very heavy bows on the E string, and we also need to make sure that our students have good setups and good bowing angles. Otherwise, it's not going to sound great on the E string. So we might want to have them go back to the teaching companion available on teachingorchestra.com, or you can just teach rote exercises where they're using heavy bows on dotted half notes, and have your violin switch to the E string and have them not use heavy bows, just use slower bows, and it'll sound fine. The E string is very thin. It's not a wound string like the other three, so it doesn't take that much weight to activate and sustain that string. You can play very light. In fact, if you press too hard against that string, you're not going to like the result. The tone is not going to be very good. If you need more tips on how to sound good on the E string, please go to Season 1, Episode 5. I have several videos on the E string alone to get your violin section to sound great on the E string. The other problem that I hear quite frequently, and it's an unfortunate problem because there are two solos here. There is a violin solo and there is a cello solo. And oftentimes one of those solos, or potentially both of those solos, don't go very well. You know, they can play it in the practice room, they can play it at home, they can play it in rehearsal, but when it's time to play it on stage in the contest, they get scared, they get nervous, and they make a mistake. It's very common that that happens. Now, as a judge, I'm not going to take points off for that. I'm not even going to mention it. I think it's inappropriate for a judge to comment on a soloist because it's singling them out from the group. If they're playing a solo, you know, they're trying their best. They're putting themselves out there. If it goes well, I'm going to say, hey, great job, soloist. If it doesn't, I'm not going to burn them for it. In the comment sheet, I'm not going to deduct a rating for it, even if it's horrible. Like even if, you know, you can't even recognize it. I'm not going to burn the whole orchestra because of one solo that didn't go so well, because of one player. That doesn't seem appropriate to me. But in any case, you want your soloist to do good. You want them to play well. You want them to sound their best on the stage. And so how do you get them comfortable in a performance situation? Well, the only way I know how to do it is to perform, to get out there and play. So play for your mom and dad. Go play for your teachers. Go play for grandma. Go play for the cat. You know, how many people have you played it for? Try to play for at least 20 different people before you play at the concert or before you play at your competition or festival or whatever you're doing. And that's going to get you nice and comfortable. You want a lot of success in maybe not the highest pressure situations, but in situations where other people are watching you and you want to do well, and you might feel a little bit of anxiety. Do you have any problems while teaching El Toro that I didn't go over? Were you able to fix those problems? Do you need help with those problems? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope to see you next time.